Um, hey, this is Anatoly. Great to have you guys here. And today I'll be talking about Solana and our upcoming CoinList auction. And to help me kind of answer questions and talk about the project, we have Kyle from Multicoin with us.
Hey, Anatoly, good to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle from Multicoin.
Awesome. Cool. So I think we're gonna start with just kind of a brief presentation on Solana and our auction, and you can find these materials on our coinlist.co/Solana page. Cool. Hopefully everybody can see this. Hey folks, so Solana is a web scale blockchain. Web scale is actually a term that Google coined in the early aughts. And what it meant to them is that it's a service that can scale to the entire internet. So this is kind of how we're thinking about Solana, is that we are building something that it's a blockchain that can scale to serve the entire internet. So, I think like when I started this project, I really started it with the motivation of building something that's high performance. And there's many classes of applications that need like a really fast and expensive, reliable blockchain. Um, and at the time in like 2017, 2018, there were, hundreds and thousands of projects that were pitching blockchain as a solution to, almost every problem in the world. But there was no way any of them were going to work on anything that was remotely working at the time back then. And even today, um, we are, I think, the most performant blockchain that's coming online, and really the only one that can handle projects that are looking at 1 million monthly active users and above. Um, so for us, we see ourselves as kind of a clear differentiator as in this speed, scale, and inexpensive category. So how do we actually get this done? When I started this, I thought everyone's going to go and kind of take this approach, because scaling distributed systems is not a new problem. It's actually a really old problem. Some of the first earliest distributed systems were radio protocols. And you have, when people first built these things, the first towers that they built, they realized that when two towers talk at the same time over the same frequency, you get noise, and they started building protocols to effectively solve the same problems that we see in blockchain. And I spent most of my career at Qualcomm working on these kinds of problems, and really working on that in that part of the technology space when it went from this really breakneck evolution from 2G to 4G. This is, if you guys remember what 2G was, these were flip phones that were not programmable. They could barely, the only thing they could do was make a phone call. And in a span of 10 years, we went from those devices that were, like basically running on microcontrollers to, holding a supercomputer in your hand, and at 5G speeds, that's 1 gigabit connections globally. And these networks can handle billions of concurrent users. I can call anybody in the world. And these are the most adversarial distributed systems out there. These networks are not just attacked by hackers that are trying to, steal people's identity. These are attacked by state actors that are well funded, that are, attacked by security companies that have runway, right? Like these problems that we have to deal with were, I think, an order of magnitude larger than just building a simple piece of software, running a SaaS or something like that. Myself and most of the team are former Qualcomm folks, and my background is distributed systems, operating systems, but co-founders, one of the co-founders is a GPU expert, the other one's a compiler expert. We kind of have, I think, maybe the best core in the space in terms of the folks that should be building these kind of systems. So that's us. Actually, Rob Walker was my boss at Qualcomm while I was working on Brew. I was a kernel engineer, and Michael Vines was Greg's boss at Qualcomm. So we were able to, as our first hires, hire our own leads. Really the best people that we ever worked with out there. So our approach to adoption has been really going after early partners in the space that are seeing some traction and seeing growth, and kind of doing this white glove approach of porting them over from whatever network they're on to Solana. And this is similar to the approach that we took when we built out the Brew operating system at Qualcomm, which was the first mobile platform. If you guys remember, when those first mobile phones came out that did have applications, there weren't really users of those applications or companies, investing a lot into that space and shipping them. And it took a lot of like initial hands-on support from teams like mine, actually, to move companies over. And at the time, Facebook didn't even want a mobile app, and it took somebody like Instagram to really convince them. So our approach has been targeting companies that are already using blockchain and already seeing traction, and giving them a high performance network that they can really scale from that first 1 million monthly active users to the next 10 million. So that's kind of been, I think, a successful model for us. So a lot of there's a lot of companies that are still in these super early stages that are not even seeing performance bottlenecks on Ethereum. And there's a few that are seeing on the kind of Gem 2 blockchains, Stellar EOS, things that might be able to go up to about 1,000, TPS, 5,000 theoretically. And while that is a lot of capacity, if you have 1 million monthly active users, you run a promotion, and 10, 20,000 of them want to do the exact same thing at the exact same time, all of a sudden you run into bottlenecks. And these bottlenecks are obvious to anybody that's ever worked in like a web company that has, a few million monthly active users, because you don't see average load, you see kind of the sporadic fast peaks that you need to handle. This is where Solana, I think, really differentiates itself from all of our competitors, because we're not sharding, because we have this one massive, giant, kind of single shard, single large capacity. We can actually handle those demands. And these demands, I think, are going to be critical for any of these companies that are already at 1 million monthly active users to move forward to the next kind of 10, 20 million. So how do we do this without sharding? Again, this kind of goes back to my background at Qualcomm, working with mobile operating systems and mobile networks. The first thing that people ever thought of was using a global clock in the network to create a source of time, and then use time as means of coordination between a large number of nodes. So what we constructed is a cryptographic source of time called proof of history. And this is a subtle but foundational component. It's not a consensus implementation. It literally introduces a virtual global clock in the network that is used as a means of coordinating all of the nodes in the network. And because we have the source of time, we can use the exact same optimization techniques that folks have been using in wireless networks, for probably 100 years at this point. And once we have that, like everything else that we're doing in terms of raw TPS numbers or latency, these are engineering problems that are, that people have been working on since, for the last 20, 30 years. It's parallel processing, it's optimizing memory throughput, it's building databases that can be horizontally scaled. It's like using a virtual machine that has a high performance JIT, and being very efficient about bandwidth usage. These are engineering problems, and these are all things that we worked on and optimized to actually get us to the 50,000 numbers that we're seeing in our open public network. So for us, like, it's also important to obviously be a blockchain for developers. Our approach there has been really to give developers something that they can't get anywhere else. One of our features is that we can run multiple virtual machines. So right now we support LLVM compatible languages like C, C++, Rust, but we also ported the Libra's Move virtual machine. That means that if you're planning on supporting Libra, you can build contracts for Libra using their Move VM, and you can also execute them on Solana. And in fact, our implementation was running about 4 times faster at the time than on Libra, which was like pretty cool for us to show off. So we're planning a EVM port as well. And what's interesting is you can even take something like a Zcash sapling virtual machine and run it in Solana as well. So if you need privacy or these more kind of chain specific features, you can port that code over and execute it inside our runtime. That's what it really means to have a multi-execution runtime. And even though it's a separate virtual machine, it's still executing in the exact same atomic state. It's executing side by side, and that state can be used and evaluated between all of these VMs. So from our, you can look at the space, and there's kind of like several categories of how you can scale. A lot of folks are working on sharding, and it is still a computer science problem, and it's still a really hard computer science problem. And even if you solve it, what you've created is a blockchain that has to separate state. That means that applications that have millions of monthly active users have to figure out how to split those millions of monthly active users, right? That these problems are still very hard to do, and I think the result is going to be slower in terms of latency, but by definition, it's going to be more expensive. That not only does sharding split state, it also splits capacity. So when people talk about raw TPS numbers in a sharded network, if you have 100 shards, each one does 500 transactions per second, it's not equivalent to a single shard that can do 50,000 TPS, because the price per transaction has to be expensive enough. You cannot do a denial of service on a single shard. So in that sense, these systems are always going to be more expensive than something that we're building. Zero knowledge proofs, I think, are maybe the most promising alternative, but still very early in development, and it's not clear that that they'll be able to do the exact same kinds of computations that you can do in an open, generic, programmable environment. So we'll see, but these are, I think, kind of the most interesting and alternatives out there. You can also do network centralization, and that was demonstrated by EOS. And that seems kind of an easy solution. The thing is that you don't need it. You don't need to centralize the network. What we've demonstrated is that you can actually get the exact same performance of a single machine that's replicated as much as you want without network centralization. So from our perspective, I think even if you could get the exact same performance in a more centralized environment, what we differentiate is that we actually have a truly decentralized network that has performance that is just as good. The layer 2 solutions like ZK rollup and using channels and things like that, we've actually had folks come to us that have been trying to use layer 2 that want an alternative. And the problem with layer 2 is that for a lot of these solutions, when you have a large group of users that are entering and exiting these networks, the setup costs of setting up the layer 2 and tearing it down ends up being a bottleneck in itself. And the number of connections you have to deal with grows kind of quadratically with the set of the network. So it's not you end up with a system that's much more complicated than it needs to be. So this is kind of our roadmap. In fact, today we launched our kind of mainnet beta and had our initial set of validators. I think we're over 50 now that have ported over from our testnet now onto mainnet beta. This is a network that's running staking and transfers, and very soon we'll run smart contracts. That's already in the release pipeline. We are planning on supporting more virtual machines in this network, and all those kinds of things are on a monthly release cycle. And the goals are for us are by the end of the year is to have 200 validators or similar numbers to Cosmos, and the kind of partners we're looking for. Our goals there are getting to 2 million monthly active users amongst all of them, and that would really demonstrate like real life usage of the network, by significant numbers. So we're super excited about that. So we are we're also, I think, not only are we fast, we're fast on actually shipping. So that's been, I think, something that's quite a differentiator. The first line of code was written February 2018. So we're basically done in under, well, roughly about 2 years. I think the company's actually formed less than 2 years ago. So we've been moving as fast as we can. And I think we've demonstrated our real thesis is that if you have built software that can leverage hardware, that you can actually horizontally scale these blockchains. So we're using hardware to scale to 50,000 TPS. We've already seen how that hardware has gotten cheaper. We went from using 4 GPU cards to 2, and now to 1. And in some cases, with using AMD's most recent processors, you don't even need a GPU card. So we anticipate this kind of fast-paced hardware growth to continue, and for us to be able to keep up with any kind of demand in terms of user growth. So this has been our kind of funding history. Around 2 years ago, we did a seed round and an A round a few months after that, over the summer, after we've built the team and demonstrated that we can actually build a high performance single node replicated state machine. We had a really good support from the validator community, and they've been part of a lot of our funding rounds, actually, including some of the seed and founding rounds were coming from validators. But most recently, we had a lot of validator support as well. Over this last summer, I believe, is when we had the validator round, and during the strategic round, a lot of the validators invested as well. So this kind of CoinList auction is our opportunity to do a token sale to the broader community, and it's strategically priced at the same price as our seed round. How we see, going to market, it's never been about, getting liquidity. It's been about user growth. And for us, that means getting users into the network at the most fair price possible. So CoinList Dutch auction is one of those ways, and setting the lowest price to the same price as a seed round is a way to show the community that really want folks in to participate in the network at this kind of like most fair price that's available at the market at the time. So far, if you take a look at kind of how tokens have been distributed, between all the investors, it's around 40%. So foundation and community pool make up about 50%, and then the founders is about 12.5. So from the foundation side, it's almost half of the network hasn't been distributed yet. Um, and these tokens are going to be strategically sold into the market based on our distribution strategy. And part of that is this staking guarantee that I'll get into a little bit later. So we've had a lot of support from a lot of folks. Kyle is from Multicoin. Foundation Capital has been, I think, probably in every round. Slow Ventures was a super early supporter. The NGC, CMCC, Blockchain, these folks have been really helping us not only on the financial side, but in terms of advice and helping us find companies and teams and partners. And it's been really awesome to have them. A lot of them are validators, like obviously Bison Trail, staking facilities, and have been also working on the tech side. So we've been, we've had a lot of support from a lot of really good people in the space. And sorry if I missed anybody. We've been super lucky with the kind of folks that have been helping us. There's a ton of resources online. You can reach out to us through the portal on Discord, Telegram, Twitter, forums, Medium. We have a really cool podcast that's got some of the top folks in the space. It's called the No Sharding Podcast. So please check it out. So some of the adoption stories that we haven't had a lot of chance to talk about is more on the DeFi side. And this is actually very appropriate, as we've seen recently. There's been some, we saw both markets panic in terms of sheer numbers, but also in terms of performance. Part of the MakerDAO problem was that gas prices shot up and the bots couldn't handle that increase in price to actually trade and rebalance. Some of the things we're building and working on building are tools where we can leverage our performance and speed for DeFi and trading. And the thing that we're really interested in are building instruments for traders like binary options, because we can demonstrate with our 400 millisecond blocks a really high performance fast oracle, and our capacity would virtually guarantee that it's never going to get clogged like we saw with Ethereum. And when you have systems like that, you can actually have an open, fair marketplace that can be resilient when we do have panic, when markets do go sideways and volatility shoots up. To us, that seems like an opportunity to build decentralized trading platforms that are even better than what you see on centralized platforms, because everything is transparent, but also is robust. We have a really amazing validator community. Over 450 signed up. Altogether, I think 150 have participated in dry runs. I think shortly after launch, we expect to get maybe 80 folks fully up and running. And for us, this is really a demonstration of a truly decentralized network, not only from just the number of people, but also geographically, because we have folks running nodes inside the Great Firewall in Singapore and Australia, across Europe, across the United States. So it's been really cool to watch this come together, really go from nothing, from us just running our own nodes, to all of a sudden having a global supercomputer that's synchronized in 400 milliseconds. So to me, this has been, I think, maybe the coolest part of the experience so far. And as we've seen in over the last 2 years that we've been building these networks, we've already seen the price for the hardware for validators drop by half, or performance increase by 2x. So from our perspective, I think what's really interesting about this network is that we are future-proof in terms of performance, that hardware is going to get faster. You know, when I started at Qualcomm, we had 400 megahertz, these 16-bit cheap devices. And when I left, there were 8-core, 64-bit, 4 gigabytes of RAM, supercomputers that you can hold in your hand. The same thing is going to happen again. In the next 10 years, you know, you're going to have CPUs with, 1,000 cores in them. And our design is the kind of design that can actually handle it. A lot of folks always ask me, like, why do we need, why isn't Bitcoin just perfect? Well, in the span of like the time that Bitcoin has been around, hardware has gotten 32 times faster. Networks have gotten at least 8 times faster, and nothing about it has changed. And fundamentally, that's a design mismatch. That means that there's something mismatched, from those kinds of networks to what's happening in the world. So one way or another, it has to change. I think we're part of that change. So we can build, I think, something that is really robust and really fast and actually scales as with the future. So we have a broad community, and we have been focusing in Asia as well. So if there are folks that are listening from Asia, please reach out to us. But we have team members that are distributed there. We have community managers, tons of validators that want to help in terms of both coordinating developers and coordinating the community growth. And we have obviously opportunity for folks that are technical to be both validators, developers, and apply for the Accelerator program. And if they want to take an application to market, we can help. But also folks that are non-technical that want to be ambassadors and kind of do a lot of the community building efforts with us as well. And I think that's it. Cool.
Hey, Anatoly, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for going through all of that. We'll next go into some Q&A, some questions and answers. My name, for those of you who don't know, is Kyle Samani. I'm a co-founder and managing partner at Multicoin Capital. We've invested in every round, every Solana round. So I've known Anatoly for about 2 years now, and work very closely with him and the team. Solana is one of our biggest investments, and we are super proud of what they've done and where they're going, and super excited to be involved. And so I'm actually very happy to be here to support Anatoly and the Solana team more broadly. And so with that, we can jump into some questions. So the first question is, Anatoly, a few days ago, you published an article about circuit breakers. Could you elaborate in detail on how to prevent and mitigate front-running and censorship of transactions by miners?
Well, that's a nearly impossible problem to solve, so I'll just be open about it, because Kyle will call bullshit on anything I say. The only thing we can do is we can build systems where we can have an assumption that at least one of the miners is honest, so, or some percentage of them are honest. So typically, like in these networks, you can assume that 2/3 are honest, or kind of everything goes wrong. But that's not really the case, because miners can continue working honestly within consensus, but be dishonest in everything else, right? Be very selfish. Selfish mining still runs the network, right? The network still makes blocks if everybody's selfish mining. So I almost see that miners can become market makers, and this kind of selfishness is almost a feature. And we've seen this feature exercised with flashnet loans, where there was an obvious opportunity for arbitrage in the state machine, and somebody took free money as a loan and paid it back in the same transaction and eliminated that arbitrage. Arbitrage is bad, right, for the market. It means somebody's getting a worse price than they should. So how I imagine this working is that we have a market that's designed around the idea that we have as many miners per second as possible, and we rotate them as fast as we can. And all of them are trying to remove arbitrage. And in the particular kind of example that I talked about in the circuit breaker article, is that in that kind of marketplace, we can also add hooks where if the volatility goes up, that's the assumption that we're making that only happens when there's mismatch of information that's outside of the blockchain and in the blockchain, right? Information is something went wrong, right? There's some news that came out that hasn't propagated yet. Volatility goes up in a particular trade, and we can slow the system down by letting people take more opportunities to change their prices, change their minds over a larger set of blocks, and then hope that at least one of the miners is honest and lets those trades in, lets those trade updates through, and the system can basically rebalance and get back into the state where all the trades are happening within the spread. And why miners would want to do that? Because we're letting them be market makers. We're letting them make profit by making trades within the spread. That means that this is their bread and butter, and they don't want to threaten that by censoring transactions during this high volatility time. Because if they do that, then traders will leave and their source of effectively risk-free revenue goes away, right? That this is kind of like how I think these systems can behave in a way where even miner front running is not a problem. So I don't know. What do you think, Kyle? Is that a possible theory or?
Yeah. So I published an essay maybe 2 days ago about why the market structure in crypto broke on March 12th when the prices crashed, and I've been thinking a lot about these types of problems. And I think it's, if you want to have real-time trades and no speed bumps or any other kind of weird features of markets, I don't see how you can avoid miner front running, but I do see how you can make it close to incentive compatible or perhaps incentive compatible. And I think what you basically described, Anatoly, is kind of how you get as close as you can to that. By cutting latency as much as possible, you make the arbitrage opportunity, like the spreads, as tight as possible. And so the value of front running becomes less and less.
Yep.
One thing I've observed, just as a general observation, is, for example, if you look at something like synthetics, they use Chainlink as their price oracle, and so I think Chainlink is updating their system every 5 minutes, and so basically all of the trade volume on the synthetics exchange is people arbitraging the underlying collateral pool, because the prices move after 2.5 minutes, and then there's a price discrepancy between synthetics and like Binance or whatever, and so. But if you collapse that down to 400 milliseconds, then it's just like there's very, very little opportunity to make those kinds of trades. So, okay, next question is, can you tell us more about the partners that Solana currently has in place?
So some of the stuff we can't talk about just simply because we are working with our partners in actual implementation. We want to announce things when things are ready. So we were working with a couple Fortune 500s on 5G. What is 5G? It's not a buzzword. It's actually hardware. It's hardware that's being shipped across the world to enable next generation networks. That particular use case, the opportunity for us there is that 5G networks have a range of about 500 feet per tower. 4G networks have a range of 30 miles. So why that matters is that in a, like you look at something like United States, if you're deploying a 5G network coast to coast, it's just an absurd, massive amount of installations you have to do. And the big carriers, they don't want to do it themselves, so they want to farm it out to a lot of different providers. And that number is actually around 1,000, 500 to 1,000 providers. So when you have 500 to 1,000 providers, you can't actually build a consortium chain because it's too many people. You can't coordinate all of them. You're also dealing with hardware tower providers that are not used to running validators, that have financial costs, financial risk associated with running these things. So it's not very well suited for this kind of consortium environment. What it is well suited for is either running a centralized asset database or running up on a public chain. Up until now, there weren't any public chains that could actually handle this kind of performance. And the specific performance I'm talking about isn't something any super complicated. It's literally just coordinating between a handset and which tower it's connected to and how much data and quality of service it wants from each one. So as simple of a real-time billing system as you can imagine. So that's kind of one of those use cases that we're working with US-based Fortune 500s. The other use case that we're working on is also, again, simple token. But the interesting thing there is that our partner has around 1.5 million monthly active users. They're growing fairly quickly. And even at those numbers, they're already dealing with capacity at the current solution, which is, I think, a private fork of Stellar. And they can't do promotions where you have 10, 20,000 people do the exact same thing at the same time because that network can't handle it. So this is where we see an opportunity. That use case, I see part of kind of this broader kind of movement in the space where we see some Web2 companies. Brave is a really good example of that. That have basically taken a Web2 use case and converted the advertisement portion into crypto. The only way that can work is if your transactions and the costs of doing that kind of spends are well below what an ad costs, which is 0.2 cents. So our fees are, I think for $10 you get 1 million transactions. That's cheap enough to where you can effectively start building ecosystems that are competitive with advertisement-based business models.
One other thing I would just add, and I can't name any names, but one thing I've observed in kind of other people talking to Solana is there's a lot of companies that they have existing user bases, millions or tens of millions of users. They see crypto, they see Ethereum, they see, hey, this is interesting. I want to enable payments between my users, some dynamic provisioning of some sort of property rights. They want to embed some of these kind of crypto properties in their existing applications and user bases. Those people, generally speaking, have tried to integrate Ethereum because it was kind of the first one out there. And they've all basically realized that like this is not going to work. And so although I don't think those people have yet formally committed to Solana, there's a lot of people in the pipeline now who like that kind of general description fits them, where they're saying, hey, I've got millions of users. I want to do some crypto stuff. How do I do crypto stuff with millions of users? And those people are really getting drawn towards Solana. Okay, cool. We've got a lot of questions coming in, both in the chat box and in the Q&A box. So I've been in the chat box. I'm gonna move to the Q&A box, and I will come back to the chat box in a second. Can you provide some clarification on the Genesis block distribution?
It is in those slides, so I'm not sure. I guess
if you can just pull up the slide and maybe just review it for
sure.
a minute or so.
Yeah. Cool. So everything that we sold to investors basically adds up to about 35.6% of the network. And this is all our rounds combined. All these rounds unlock at month 9. So we're doing a very different approach to unlocking and creating liquidity for the network from what people have usually seen. The rest of the tokens, 12.5% plus 33.9, roughly 50% of the network, is effectively what's under the control of the foundation. This is a separate entity that's a Swiss foundation. Myself and Eric, who's a co-founder, have a minority stake in it. The other participants have been really strong community backers with us for the last 2 years. There's from the Validator side, from kind of our partner crypto side, and from the investor side. So there's about 5 members on the board there. and they will be kind of managing how those tokens are distributed over time. Part of that is this initial auction, and the other 12.5% goes to the founding team. So to kind of give you a better understanding of why we're unlocking everybody in month 9 is that we kind of saw over the last year a lot of projects launched with a linear unlock. If you look at the intent of that, was that to protect users from losing value in the token. And the result was that I think quite the opposite, is that every time supply was generated, the price dropped, right? Because there weren't enough buyers to handle it. And that destroyed their community that they were able to build up prior to that. And a lot of value is actually created from the network effects in the community. The way I look at these networks, it's almost like, those early, lending clubs where you had a bunch of people come together, pool their funds, and then start, investing together. You look at Ethereum and DeFi applications, the folks that participate in all those, there's a lot of overlap between them and early Ethereum backers. And those networks are effectively what's powering that DeFi ecosystem. So from my perspective, this first year of us going out is not about getting our investors liquidity. It's about actually generating and creating a community of folks that are early participants. Then ironically, I think the only way to get there, or I guess counterintuitively, the only way to get there is actually to have a single unlock where price discovery can occur and we arrive at a fair market value, whatever that may be. Because when you do get to fair market value, that's when you get to an equitable distribution, because tokens can flow from whoever has them to whoever doesn't at a fair price. So to make sure that in those early days, our early community folks have effectively some protection, because we don't know how that price discovery is going to occur over this year. What we're doing is a 90% price guaranteed auction for anyone that stakes their tokens. So main difference, if you have to think about it, what is the difference between this price guarantee and Algorand's, is that Algorand's price guarantee went to the person. Our price guarantee goes to the token. That means that anybody that buys these tokens anywhere in any marketplace in the next 3 months can stake them. And staking and registering them means that they get a 90% price guarantee. So it doesn't matter where you get them. The folks that get them at the auction, they can stake them immediately to get the price guarantee. But at whatever marketplace that you get them later in the next 3 months, as long as you register with us and you stake them, until month 12, you have effectively 90% price protection. And that 90% is based on the auction clearing price, not the price that you purchase. So that's one thing we have to keep in mind. The reason we were able to do this is because during this auction, we take 90% of the proceeds and we basically lock them up. This allows us to kind of let price discovery occur over the year effectively. So that allows folks that get in now basically participate in the network. And if we're totally wrong about what the price should be, because that's a nearly impossible problem to get right, they can rebalance, or they can get 90% of their funds back, and hopefully still participate in the network in some other way.
Great. Next question is, what else is needed for broader crypto adoption besides scalability?
Oh man, there's a lot. I think I guess I have been able to see this a couple times. So early internet adoption, and that was really slow. I remember internet in 1996. There were 40 million people on the internet. In the sense, it was slow that it took until like 5 years, I would say, for it to really pick up. And we started seeing things like Friendster that had viral growth on the internet. And those were applications that were built solely for the internet, on the internet. That had no connection to the brick and mortar world. It wasn't even a search engine that was people could understand the purpose of it. So I don't know when we'll see that, but I think we need to get to a point where we have 300 million users with wallets. They understand that they have their own cryptographic keys that control value. And when we get to those 300 million, then I think we'll start seeing those kind of interesting applications pop up. Our goal to get there is this kind of going after projects that are seeing growth. So if we collect, all the projects that are seeing, 50% growth, going from 1 million to 2 million to 10 million monthly active users, they're all in the same network. All of a sudden, we're the network with, 300 million monthly active users. And then that's where I think we win, right? Nobody's going to argue with that. So this has been kind of how we're trying to position ourselves. So to answer that question, we need users. Users is the key part to adoption of anything.
Yeah, I think maybe just add a little color on how I think about it. I think there's a lot of people today trying to figure out how to make trust minimized software work. I mean, like Twitter announced that they're trying to decentralize themselves, right? Like Jack Dorsey did a tweet storm in December about that. A lot of these people are trying to figure out how to do that, and they need a foundation on top of which to build, and that foundation doesn't exist yet. My kind of hope for Solana is that once it's out there, it provides a foundation that everyone can rely on. And then you can start to have people like Twitter, like Brave, like lots of others say, hey, like this is like where you go build the future of kind of trust minimized software. Cool. So next question. This is kind of related. What does Solana's throughput enable that we have not yet seen manifest on existing blockchains?
So the price that we can do on our chain allows companies that are running on private chains or on the Ethereum testnet to basically run on a public network. $10 for 1 million transactions is basically nearly free, but it's enough for us to deter spam. So the kind of things that we can enable is that, the cost for Chainlink to update a price every 400 milliseconds. In that particular use case, you can build a binary option that traders can trade against and see their price settle in a few seconds. So those things I think are interesting from like kind of financial product perspective. But I think what's more practical that we'll see demand for from our partners are just latency. If I'm a Web2 company and I have Web2 users, they expect things to happen in under 200 milliseconds. We can get almost there, right? 400 millisecond blocks means that on average, your transaction should land somewhere halfway in the middle of that block. So you should see, confirmation roughly within like 2 to 400 milliseconds. So that gets fast enough to where users may forget that they're actually using a blockchain. And that means that we can start growing these networks in the same kind of speed and pace as you grow Web2 products. So that to me is like kind of really the exciting part about what we're doing.
Cool. The other thing I would add to that I'm really excited about is like, especially financial related applications, like you just need low latency. If you're ever going to build DeFi exchanges, like you can't have market makers wait 15 seconds to get transactions in a block. Even 5 seconds is too slow. People need certainty that transactions are being inserted in the blockchain quickly. And so I think that like if we're actually going to have people push real amounts of money through the system, and like you just need to have low latency, and that's one thing that really excites me. Okay, this is the last question that's in the Q&A box. What's the learning curve like for developers? Would it be helpful to understand? It would be helpful to understand how Solana is engaging developers.
So we're actually like the learning curve for learning Solana is much simpler than learning, I would say, every other blockchain. Not because that very, very smart. It's that we are just using standard tools. We use a standard compiler, LLVM, so you can use your standard languages as a developer. There's already tons of documentation for C, C++, Rust. We're enabling more virtual machines, and there's no reason why we couldn't enable JavaScript, Python, and more traditional languages. The programming model itself is a single giant atomic state machine, and you can think of it as a key value store. So in that sense, it's a very simple programming model that we literally have. None of our partners have had too many questions. When we give them the docs, they just kind of go build the thing, and it works. Reason for that is because there's no sharding. If you look at systems that shard, the amount of complexity they introduce is really not seen anywhere else in general engineering. Typical developers, when they build either desktop software, they build software for AWS, they even build software against MySQL or something like that. They don't deal with sharded spaces that are unsynchronized. It's just not something that developers are used to. So those problems are much harder to kind of deal with and to educate and to build tools that are robust and don't contain a lot of foot guns. So we'll see how those companies actually accomplish that. For us, it's been just very simple. You write a contract, it does its job in a synchronous atomic way, and it's done in 400 milliseconds. So
it really is simple. One thing I've observed, having looked at a lot of the other teams out there, is that they keep making it more complicated to get the thing done, whether it's new trust assumptions with like layer 2 or like state channels or sharding or whatever. And like developers have been trained, they want to have a database, they want to be able to read and write from the database, and that's it. And like that's what Solana provides. But Solana provides all the additional trust minimization guarantees that you would expect from a permissionless crypto system. So great. Next question here is, what are the hardware requirements for running a validator on Solana?
So the 50K TPS numbers, we can actually observe them with 32 core systems, and I think about 32 gigs of RAM. But I've seen folks run with much lower configurations. If you use a GPU card, you need fewer CPU cores. So there's actually somebody that got it running on a $5 droplet. So the thing is that under steady state, you don't need a lot of hardware. It's only when there's peak demands. And we assume that you will only need peak demands, not all the time, but sometimes. And there's folks like Chorus One that are building tools for us to automatically scale up and down. So that depends on what your deployment looks like. I would mostly worry about the bandwidth if you're running a validator. So a lot of folks are using co-location or running the validators at home. So we have very few kind of AWS, Google Cloud provider, Google Cloud hosted nodes.
Okay. Next question is, can you talk about the Solana Accelerator? When do you think you'll have your first cohort? How big will it be? That kind of thing.
We should announce kind of the cohort details in a couple weeks. The Accelerator is open to application developers. We're looking at a bunch of teams, and our goal for us is to find teams and then connect them to our investors that invested in us, and through all the investors that we ever pitched to, so we can help you go get funding and kind of bring your idea to market. And the kinds of ideas we're looking for, obviously the ones that need a fast blockchain. So if you have a product that you're thinking of, if only had a fast blockchain, that's kind of the perfect opportunity for us. We have some preconceived ideas, and I don't even want to share them because I think founders need to be kind of driven by their own, but what they want to build versus what anyone else tells them to build. So please apply if you think you have something that needs a fast blockchain.
Great. Well, it looks like we're coming up. I think we have 5 or 6 minutes left. And so, Toly, if you could please kind of wrap up and also remind everyone about the auction participation instructions. Yeah, that would be super helpful.
Cool. So really, like, thank you guys for joining us. So if you go to coinlist.co/Solana, they'll take you to the materials that we shared today, as well as the instructions on how to participate in the auction. It's a Dutch auction, and don't forget that part of our strategy is that there's a price guarantee. So if you stake your tokens, you effectively get 90% guarantee from whatever the auction clears at. The Dutch auction clears at the same price for everybody. So this is, I would say, one of the most fairest way to do distribution and price discovery in the space. Cool. That's basically everything.
Well, great. Hey, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We just had a good session with Anatoly. And I think we will be having a video of this session posted online as well. So if you missed anything, or if you'd like to share this with any friends, I think there will be a recording available as well. And last but not least, if you wanted to see the PowerPoint that Anatoly presented earlier, if you go to coinlist.co/Solana, you can find that PowerPoint there. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.